Hey, hello. Rebecca Funk was first this time, at least on my chat. She was first in my chat. I'm gonna do that hand dancing everybody does.
It's called tutting.
Tutting. Welcome everybody to Conk's Corner with John Reedsley, aka moi, John Voth. Mark is there.
Yo.
And little Dexy is here too. He always turns away from the camera. He's a little bit camera shy. I read Harry Potter every single day for an hour to connect with people, to have some fun, to discover Harry Potter, to just distract ourselves from everything that's going on. I have not read the books. I have not read 1 ounce of them, except for now. I'm in the 3rd book. I'm loving it. I haven't seen the movies except for 2 when I was a teenager, and I don't remember anything from them. So this is all completely new to me. I read the comments every single day. I go through them afterwards. Please do not reveal any hints or spoilers. We want to discover this as we go along. I leave a little Q&A at the end for anybody who wants to interact and just talk at the end, because I can't do both at the same time. I save all of these on YouTube, so you can go on there to catch up. It's a link in my bio. And finally, there's a bunch of healthcare workers. I was going to say just nurses again. A bunch of healthcare workers who are listening in. Today we got Alana Wright, Janelle, Carmen, and Kendall in one room, I'm guessing at the hospital. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Other people who are usually on the chat, thank you, Lawrence Belmer, Darren Wiebe, Katrina Joy, Sarah Popta, and Jess.xx. So thank you all. And if you happen to be a healthcare worker, let me know. Okay, so where were we when we left? Oh right, they were climbing on these weird horse eagles and taming them with Hagrid. And Hagrid, this was his first class, unfortunately didn't end very well because Draco Malfoy got slashed in the arm, is bleeding. And his dad is Lucius Malfoy, so we'll see where that goes. Before I start, you are valued, you have purpose, and you are loved. Don't forget that. Okay, we are reading from page, let me see, page 90 from this book. Page 90 if you want to read along. Malfoy got dragged away. It's 91. Very shaken, the Care of Magical Creatures class followed at a walk. The Slytherins were all shouting about Hagrid. Pansy Parkinson. They should all sack him straight away, said Pansy Parkinson, who was in tears. Dean Thomas. Okay, I think I actually made him Australian originally. Australian. It was Malfoy's fault, snapped Dean Thomas. Crabbe and Goyelle flexed their muscles threateningly. They all climbed the stone steps into the deserted entrance hall. I'm going to see if he's okay, said Pansy, and they all watched her run up the marble staircase. The Slytherins, still muttering about Hagrid, headed away in the direction of their dungeon common room. Harry, Ron, and Hermione proceeded upstairs to Gryffindor Tower. Do you think he'll be all right? Said Hermione nervously. Of course he will. Madame Pomfrey can mend cuts in about a second, said Harry, who had had far worse injuries mended magically by the matron. That was a really bad thing to happen in Hagrid's first class, though, wasn't it? Said Ron, looking worried. Trust Malfoy to mess things up for him. They were among the first to reach the great hall at dinner time, hoping to see Hagrid, but he wasn't there. They wouldn't sack him, would they? Said Hermione anxiously, not touching her steak and kidney pudding. They'd better not, said Ron, who wasn't eating either. Harry was watching the Slytherin table. A large group, including Crabbe and Goyelle, were huddled together, deep in conversation. Harry was sure they were cooking up their own version of how Malfoy had got injured. Well, you can't say it wasn't an interesting first day back, said Ron gloomily. They went up to the crowded Gryffindor common room after dinner and tried to do the homework Professor McGonagall had set them. But all 3 of them kept breaking off and glancing out of the tower window. There's a light on in Hagrid's window, Harry said suddenly. Ron looked at his watch. If we hurried, we could go down and see him. It's still quite early. I don't know, Hermione said slowly. I don't know, Hermione said slowly. And Harry saw her glance at him. I'm allowed to walk across the grounds, he said pointedly. Sirius Black hasn't got past the Dementors here, has he? So they put their things away and headed out of the portrait hall, glad not to meet anybody on their way to the front doors, as they weren't entirely sure they were supposed to be out. The grass was still wet and looked almost black in the twilight. When they reached Hagrid's hut, they knocked, and a voice growled, "Come in!" He's so grumpy right now. Hagrid was sitting in his shirt sleeves at his scrubbed wooden table. His boarhound, Fang, had his head in Hagrid's lap. One look told them that Hagrid had been drinking a lot. There was a pewter tankard, almost as big as a bucket in front of him, and he seemed to be having difficulty in getting them into focus. Okay, great. This is drunk Hagrid.
Look, Harry Potter, expect it's a record.
He said thickly when he recognized them.
Don't reckon they've ever had a teacher who only lasted a day before.
You haven't been sacked, Hagrid, gasped Hermione.
Not yet,
said Hagrid miserably, taking a huge gulp of whatever was in the tankard.
But it's only a matter of time, isn't it? After Malfoy.
How is he? How is he? Said Ron as they all sat down. It wasn't serious, was it?
Madame Pomfrey fixed him best she could,
said Hagrid dully.
But he's saying it's still agony. Oh, covered in bandages, moaning.
He's faking it, said Harry at once. Madame Pomfrey can mend anything. She regrew half my bones last year. Trust Malfoy to milk it for all it's worth.
School governors have been told, of course, said Hagrid miserably. They reckon I started too big. Should have left hippogriffs for later. Done flubber worms or summat. Just thought it'd make a good first lesson. Oh, it's all my fault.
It's all Malfoy's fault, Hagrid, said Hermione earnestly. We're witnesses, said Harry. You said hippogriffs attack if you insult them. It's Malfoy's problem he wasn't listening. We'll tell Dumbledore what really happened. Yeah, don't worry, Hagrid. We'll back you up, said Ron. Tears leaked out of the crinkled corners of Hagrid's beetle-black eyes. He grabbed both Ron and Harry and pulled them into a bone-breaking hug. I think you've had enough to drink, Hagrid, said Hermione firmly. She took the tankard from the table and went outside to empty it.
Oh, maybe she's right,
said Hagrid, letting go of Harry and Ron, who both staggered away, rubbing their ribs. Hagrid heaved himself out of his chair and followed Hermione unsteadily outside. They heard a loud splash. What's he done? Said Harry nervously as Hermione came back in with the empty tankard. Stuck his head in the water barrel, said Hermione, putting the tankard away. Hagrid came back, his long hair and beard sopping wet, wiping the water out of his eyes.
That's better,
he said, shaking his head like a dog and drenching them all.
Listen, it was good of you to come and see me. I really...
Hagrid stopped dead, staring at Harry as though he'd only just realized he was there.
What do you think you're doing, eh?
He roared so suddenly that they jumped a foot in the air.
You're not to go wandering around after dark, Harry, and you two, letting him.
Hagrid strode over to Harry, grabbed his arm and pulled him to the door.
Come on,
Hagrid said angrily.
I'm taking you all back to school, and don't let me catch you walking down to see me after dark again. I'm not worth that.
Oh, he got real mad. Got real mad. In a chapter. Chapter 7, the boggart in the wardrobe. Some kind of, I don't know what a boggart is. Question for you. What's a fun one? I write down a couple of questions each time so that I can interact with you. What's the worst thing you did as a kid? What's the worst thing you did as a kid? That's what I want to know. Malfoy didn't reappear in classes until late on Thursday morning, when the Slytherins and Gryffindors were halfway through double potions. He swaggered into the dungeon, his right arm covered in bandages and bound up in a sling, acting, in Harry's opinion, as though he was the heroic survivor of some dreadful battle. How is it, Draco? How is it? This is Pansy Parkinson. She was like the Little Britain girl, Vicky, I think. And then, yeah, okay. How is it, Draco? Simpered Pansy Parkinson. Does it hurt much? Yeah, yeah, said Malfoy, putting on a brave sort of grimace. But Harry saw him wink at Crabbe and Goyle when Pansy had looked away. Oh, he's starting to show off to girls. Settle down, said Professor Snape idly. Harry and Ron scowled at each other. Snoop wouldn't have said settle down if they'd walked in late. He'd have given them detention, but Malfoy had always been able to get away with anything in Snape's class. Snape was head of Slytherin House and generally favored his own students before all others. They were making a new potion today, a shrinking solution. Malfoy set up his cauldron right next to Harry and Ron, so that they were preparing their ingredients on the same table. Sir, Malfoy called, Sir, I'll need help cutting up these daisy roots because of my arm. Weasley, cut up Malfoy's roots for him, said Snape without looking up. Ron went brick red. There's nothing wrong with your arm, he hissed at Malfoy. Malfoy smirked across the table. Weasley, you heard Professor Snape. Cut up these roots. Ron seized his knife, pulled Malfoy's roots towards him, and began to chop them roughly so that they were all different sizes. Professor, drawled Malfoy, Weasley's mutilating my roots, sir. Snape approached their table, stared down his hooked nose at the roots, then gave Ron an unpleasant smile from beneath his long, greasy black hair. Change roots with Malfoy, Weasley. But, sir, Ron had spent the last quarter of an hour carefully shredding his own roots into exactly equal pieces. No, said Snape in his most dangerous voice. Oh, wait, what's his dangerous voice? No. Wait, what's it? Yeah, what is it? Because he's so drawly. No. No. Yeah, because right when he's walking and floating, he's usually like going. Oh. And then when he's aggressive, he's like no. Okay, Ron shoved his own beautifully cut roots across the table at Malfoy, then took up the knife again. And, sir, I'll need this shrivel fig skinned, said Malfoy, his voice full of malicious laughter. Potter, you can skin Malfoy's shrivel fig, said Snoop, giving Harry the look of loathing he always reserved just for him. Harry took Malfoy's shrivel fig as Ron set about trying to repair the damage to the roots he now had to use. Harry skinned the shrivel fig as fast as he could and flung it back across the table at Malfoy without speaking. Malfoy was smirking more broadly than ever. Seen your pal Hagrid lately? He asked them quietly. None of your business, said Ron jerkily, without looking up. I'm afraid he won't be a teacher much longer, said Malfoy in a tone of mock sorrow. Father's not very happy about my injury. Keep talking, Malfoy, and I'll give you a real injury, snarled Ron. He's complained to the school governors and to the Ministry of Magic. Father's got a lot of influence, you know. And a lasting injury like this, he gave a huge fake sigh. Who knows if my arm will ever be the same again? So that's why you're putting it on, said Harry, accidentally beheading a dead caterpillar, because his hand was shaking in anger, to try and get Hagrid sacked. Well, said Malfoy, lowering his voice to whisper, partly, Potter, but there are other benefits too. Weasley, slice my caterpillars for me. Oh, man, I do not like this kid. A good thrashing from his father would do him good. A few cauldrons away, Neville was in trouble. Neville regularly went to pieces and potions lessons. It was his worst subject, and his great fear of Professor Snape made things 10 times worse. His potion, which was supposed to be a bright acid green, had turned orange, Longbottom, said Snape, ladling some up and allowing it to splash back into the cauldron so that everybody could see. Orange. Tell me, boy, does anything penetrate that thick skull of yours? Didn't you hear me say quite clearly that only one rat spleen was needed? Didn't I state plainly that a dash of leech juice would suffice? What do I have to do
to make you understand, Longbottom.
Neville was pink and trembling. He looked as though he was on the verge of tears. "Please, sir," said Hermione. "Please, may I have some more?" Sorry. "Please, I could help Neville put it right."
I don't remember asking you to show off, Miss Granger, said Snape coldly,
And Hermione went as pink as Neville.
Longbottom, at the end of this lesson, we will feed a few drops of this potion to your toad and see what happens. Perhaps that will encourage you to do it properly.
Snape moved away, leaving Neville breathless with fear.
Help me!
What does he get? Oh, yeah.
Help me!
He moaned to Hermione. "Hey, Harry," said Seamus Finnegan, leaning over to borrow Harry's brass scales. "Have you heard? Daily Prophet this morning. They reckon Sirius Black's been sighted." "Where?" said Harry and Ron quickly. On the other side of the table, Malfoy looked up, listening closely. Not too far from here," said Seamus, who looked excited. "It was a Muggle who saw him. Of course, she didn't really understand. The Muggles think he's just an ordinary criminal, don't they? So she phoned the telephone hotline. By the time the Ministry of Magic got there, he was gone." "Not too far from here," Ron repeated, looking significantly at Harry. Looking significantly at Harry. How does one look significantly? He turned around and saw Malfoy watching closely. "What, Malfoy? Need something else skinned?" But Malfoy's eyes were shining malevolently. Oh gosh, that's hard. Malevolently. They were shining, and they were fixed on Harry. He leaned across the table. "Thinking of trying to catch Black single-handed, Potter?" "Yeah, that's right," said Harry offhandedly. Malfoy's thin mouth was curving in a mean smile. "Of course, if it was me," he said quietly, "I'd have done something before now. I wouldn't be staying in school like a good boy. I'd be out there looking for him." "What are you talking about, Malfoy?" said Ron roughly. "Don't you know, Potter?" breathed Malfoy, his pale eyes narrowed. "No what?" Malfoy let out a low, sneering laugh. Oh, how does that work? Steering. Oh man. Maybe you'd rather not risk your neck, he said. "Want to leave it to the Dementors, do you? But if it was me, I'd want revenge. I'd hunt him down myself." "What are you talking about?" said Harry angrily. But at that moment, Snape called.
You should have finished adding your ingredients by now. This potion needs to stew before it can be drunk. Clear away while it simmers, and then we'll test Longbottoms.
Crabbe and Goyle laughed. Crabbe and Goyle laughed openly, watching Neville sweat as he stirred his potion feverishly. Poor Neville. Hermione was muttering instructions to him out of the corner of her mouth. Yeah, it's goofy, but practically, so that Snape wouldn't see. Harry and Ron packed away their unused ingredients and went to wash their hands and ladles in the stone basin in the corner. What did Malfoy mean? Harry muttered to Ron as he stuck his hands under the icy jet that poured from a gargoyle's mouth. Why would I want revenge on Black? He hasn't done anything to me, yet. He's making it up, said Ron savagely. He's trying to make you do something stupid. The end of the lesson in sight, Snape strode over to Neville, who was cowering by his cauldron.
Everyone, gather round, said Snape, his black eyes glittering, and watch what happens to Longbottom's toad. If he has managed to produce a shrinking solution, it will shrink to a tadpole. If, as I don't doubt, he has done it wrong, his toad is likely to be poisoned. What a douche. He's like, let's kill this animal that this kid loves. How is this guy still a teacher? Dumbledore's like, his methods are unorthodox, but he gets the job done. There was a moment, where were we?
The Gryffindors watched fearfully. The Slytherins looked excited. Snape picked up Trevor the Toad in his left hand and dipped a small spoon into Neville's potion, which was now green. He trickled a few drops down Trevor's throat. There was a moment of hushed silence in which Trevor gulped. Gulp! Then there was a small pop, and Trevor the Tadpole was wriggling in Snape's palm. The Gryffindors burst into applause. Good job, Neville! Good job! Snape, looking sour, pulled a small bottle from the pocket of his robe, poured a few drops on top of Trevor, and he reappeared, suddenly, fully grown. Good job. 5 points from Gryffindor, said Snape, which wiped the smiles from everybody's face. I told you not to help him, Miss Granger. Class dismissed. Oh, that's nice of Hermione. Yeah, I will do more character interactions. You know what? When I find the laughs and like with Vernon, his like breath, when I find those non-verbal things, that's when the characters actually come alive and make sense to me for some reason. I don't know why. Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed the steps to the entrance hall. Harry was still thinking about what Malfoy had said, while Ron was seething about Snape. Who said this? Oh yeah, 5 points from Gryffindor because the potion was all right. Why didn't you lie, Hermione? You should have said Neville did it all by himself. Hermione didn't answer. Ron looked around. Where is she? He's just so used to snarking at her. He's just like, here we go, time for snarking. Doesn't even look at her. Harry turned too. They were at the top of the steps now, watching the rest of the class pass them, heading for the Great Hall and lunch. She was right behind us, said Ron, frowning. Malfoy passed them, walking between Crabbe and Goyle. He smirked at Harry and disappeared. There she is, said Harry. Hermione was panting slightly, hurrying up the stairs. One hand was clutching her bag, the other seemed to be tucking something down the front of her robes. How did you do that? Said Ron. What? Said Hermione, joining them. One minute you were right behind us. The next moment, you were back at the bottom of the stairs again. What? Hermione looked slightly confused. Oh, I had to go back for something. Oh, no. A seam had split on Hermione's bag. Harry wasn't surprised. He could see that it was crammed with at least a dozen large and heavy books. Why are you carrying all these around with you? Ron asked her. You know how many subjects I'm taking, said Hermione breathlessly. Couldn't hold these for me, could you? But Ron was turning over the books she had handed him, looking at the covers. You haven't got any of these subjects today. It's only Defense Against the Dark Arts this afternoon. Oh, yes, said Hermione vaguely, but she packed all the books back into her bag just the same. I hope there's something good for lunch. I'm starving, she added, and she marched off towards the Great Hall. Do you get the feeling Hermione's not telling us something? Ron asked Harry. Hermione's got secrets. You need to watch a Harry Potter musical after you're done with the series. Okay, I will. Monas Makeup Mania. Another question for you. What's something that's true to you, or maybe what's something true that almost nobody agrees on with you? So it's something you say, I know this is true, but everybody you tell doesn't agree with you. It might be a fact, might be something personal, whatever it is. Professor Lupin wasn't there when they arrived at his first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson. Oh yeah, Lupin. They all sat down, took out their books, quills and parchments, and were talking when he finally entered the room. Oh yeah, he was like raspy. No, not just raspy, but more like, what'd you call it? Yeah, anyway, I have an idea for him. Let's see. Lupin smiled vaguely and placed his tatty old briefcase on the teacher's desk. He was as shabby as ever, but looked healthier than he had on the train, as though he had had a few square meals. Good afternoon, he said. Would you please put all your books back in your bags? Today's will be a practical lesson. You will only need your wands. Let me know if that works. A few curious looks were exchanged as the class put away their books. They had never had a practical defense against the dark arts before. Unless you counted the memorable class last year, when their old teacher had brought a cage full of pixies to class and set them loose. Right then, said Professor Lupin, when everyone was ready. If you'd follow me. Yeah? Great. Puzzled but interested, The class got to its feet and followed Professor Lupin out of the classroom. He led them along the deserted corridor and around the corner. He's like one of those teachers in all these typical movies where he's like, you won't understand anything I'm doing, but at the end, you'll look back and be like, man, he knew right from the beginning what he was teaching us. Just unorthodox all the way through. Okay. He led them along the deserted corridor and around a corner, where the first thing they saw was Peeves the poltergeist, who was floating upside down in midair and stuffing the nearest keyhole with chewing gum. I love Peeves. Okay, what was his voice again? Got your tongue! Ah! Okay, great. Peeves didn't look up until Professor Lupin was 2 feet away. Then he wiggled his curly-toed feet and broke into song. Loony loopy Lupin, Peeves sang. Loony loopy Lupin, loony loopy Lupinette. Rude and unmanageable as he almost always was, Peeves usually showed some respect towards the teachers. Everyone looked quickly at Professor Lupin to see how he would take this. To their surprise, he was still smiling. I'd take that gum out of the keyhole if I were you, Peeves, he said pleasantly. Mr. Filch won't be able to get into his brooms. Filch was the Hogwarts caretaker, a bad-tempered, failed wizard who waged a constant war against the students, and, indeed, Peeves. However, Peeves paid no attention to Professor Lupin's words, except to blow a loud, wet raspberry. Professor Lupin gave a small sigh and took out his wand. Lupin is a boss. This is a useful little spell, he told the class over his shoulder. Please watch closely. He raised the wand to shoulder height, said, Wadiwasi, Wadiwasi, and pointed at Peeves. With the force of a bullet, the wad of chewing gum shot out of the keyhole and straight down Peeves' left nostril. He whirled right way up, and zoomed away, cursing. Cool, sir, said Dean Thomas in amazement. Thank you, Dean, said Professor Lupin, putting his wand away again. Shall we proceed? They set off again, the class looking Peeves Slimer. The class looking at shabby Professor Lupin with increased respect. He led them down a second corridor and stopped right outside the staff room door. Inside, please, said Professor Lupin, opening it and standing back. The staff room, a long, paneled room full of old, mismatched chairs, was empty, except for one teacher. Professor Snape was sitting in a low armchair, and he looked around as the class filed in. Oh. His eyes were glittering, and there was a nasty sneer playing around his mouth. As Professor Lupin came in and made to close the door behind him, Snoop said, Leave it open, Lupin. I'd rather not witness this. He got to his feet and strode past the class, his black robes billowing behind him. At the doorway, he turned on his heel and said, Possibly no one's warned you, Lupin, but this class contains Neville Longbottom. I would advise you not to entrust him with anything difficult, not unless Miss Granger is hissing instructions in his ear. Neville went scarlet. Harry glared at Snape. It was bad enough that he bullied Neville in his own classes, let alone doing it in front of the other teachers. Professor Lupin had raised his eyebrows. I was hoping that Neville would assist me with the first stage of the operation. Oh, this teacher's dope. I like him. He's dope, he said. And I'm sure he will perform it admirably. And I'm sure he will perform it Neville's face went, if possible, even redder. Snape's lip curled, but he left, shutting the door with a snap. Now then, said Professor Lupin, beckoning the class towards the end of the room, where there was nothing except an old wardrobe in which the teachers kept their spare robes. As Professor Lupin went to stand next to it, the wardrobe gave a sudden wobble, banging off the wall. Nothing to worry about, said Professor Lupin calmly, as a few people jumped backwards in alarm. There's a boggart in there. Most people seemed to feel that this was something to worry about. Neville gave Professor Lupin a look of pure terror. I realize that most of these times I'm just doing characters and laughing about myself. But actually, it's the characters I'm laughing at. The characters are funny to me. And Seamus Finnegan eyed the now rattling doorknob apprehensively. Boggarts like dark, enclosed spaces, said Professor Lupin. Wardrobes, the gap beneath beds, the cupboards under sinks. I once met one that had lodged itself in a grandfather clock. This one moved in yesterday afternoon, and I asked the headmaster if the staff would leave it to give my third years some practice. So, the first question we must ask ourselves... Oh, no. So, the first question we must ask ourselves is, what is a boggart? Hermione put up her hand. It's a shapeshifter, she said. It can take the shape of whatever it thinks will frighten us most. Couldn't have put it better myself, said Professor Lupin, and Hermione glowed. So the boggart sitting in the darkness within has not yet assumed a form. He does not yet know what will frighten the person on the other side of the door. Nobody knows what a boggart looks like when he is alone. But when I let him out, he will immediately become whatever each of us most fears. This means, said Professor Lupin, choosing to ignore Neville's small splutter of terror, that we have a huge advantage over the boggart before we begin. Have you spotted it, Harry? Trying to answer a question with Hermione next to him, bobbing up and down on the balls of her feet with her hand in the air, was very off-putting, but Harry had a go. Because there are so many of us, it won't know what shape it should be? Precisely, said Professor Lupin. And Hermione put her hand down, looking a little disappointed. It's always best to have company when you're dealing with a boggart. He becomes confused. Which, should he become a headless corpse or a flesh-eating slug? Which should he become? A headless corpse or a flesh-eating slug? I once saw a boggart make that very mistake. Tried to frighten two people at once and turned himself into half a slug. Not remotely frightening. The charm that repels a boggart is simple, yet it requires force of mind. You see, the thing that really finishes a boggart is laughter. What you need to do is to force it to assume a shape that you find amusing. We will practice the charm without wands first. After me, please. Ridiculous! Ridiculous! said the class together. Good, said Professor Lupin. Very good. But that was the easy part, I'm afraid. You see, the word alone is not enough, and this is where you come in, Neville. The wardrobe shook again, though not as much as Neville. Wait, what were they doing with this ridiculous? It doesn't even explain it. Just like, okay, everybody do this. Okay? Just move on. No explanation. The wardrobe shook again, though not as much as Neville, who walked forward as though he was heading for the gallows. Right, Neville, said Professor Lupin. First things first. What would you say is the thing that frightens you most in the world? Neville's lips moved, but no noise came out. Didn't catch that, Neville. Sorry, said Professor Lupin cheerfully. Lupin looked around rather wildly. Ridiculous is the verbal part of the spell. Yeah, but what spell? What does it do? Neville looked around rather wildly, as though begging someone to help him, then said, in barely more than a whisper, Professor Snape. Nearly everyone laughed. Even Neville grinned apologetically. Professor Lupin, however, looked thoughtful. Professor Snape. Neville, I believe you live with your grandmother. Yes, said Neville nervously. But I don't want the boggart to turn into her either.
No, you misunderstand me, said Professor Lupin, now smiling. I wonder, could you tell us what sort of clothes your grandmother usually wears?
Neville looked startled, but said, Well, always the same hat, a tall one with a stuffed vulture on top, and a long dress, green normally, and sometimes a fox fur scarf.
And a handbag? Prompted Professor Lupin.
A big red one, said Neville.
Right then, said Professor Lupin. Can you picture those clothes very clearly, Neville?
Can you see them in your mind's eye?
Yes, said Neville uncertainly, plainly wondering what was coming next.
When the boggart bursts out of this wardrobe, Neville, and sees you, it will assume the form of Professor Snape, said Lupin, and you will raise your wand, thus, and cry, ridiculous, and concentrate hard on your grandmother's clothes. If all goes well, Professor Boggart Snape will be forced into that vulture-topped hat, that green dress, that big red handbag.
There was a great shout of laughter. Just one kid. It doesn't say everybody laughed. Just one little child. Just one kid. He doesn't know when to laugh. He doesn't get humor. Oh, no? Okay. The wardrobe wobbled more violently.
If Neville is successful, the boggart is likely to turn his attention to each of us in turn, said Professor Lupin. I would like all of you to take a moment now to think of the thing that scares you most, and imagine how you might force it to look comical.
The room went quiet. Harry thought what scared him most in the world. His first thought was Lord Voldemort. A Voldemort returned to full strength. But before he even started to plan a possible counterattack on a boggart Voldemort, a horrible image came floating to the surface of his mind. A rotting, glistening hand, slithering back beneath a black cloak, a long, rattling breath from an unseen mouth, then a cold so penetrating it felt like drowning. Harry shivered, then looked around, hoping no one had noticed. Many people had their eyes shut tight. Ron was muttering to himself, "Take its legs off." Harry was sure he knew what that was about. Ron's greatest fear was spiders. Oh, yeah.
Everyone ready,
said Professor Lupin. Harry felt a lurch of fear. He wasn't ready. How could you make a Dementor less frightening? But he didn't want to ask for more time. Everyone else was nodding and rolling up their sleeves.
Neville, we're going to back away, said Professor Lupin. Let you have a clear field, all right? I'll call the next person forward. Everyone back now. Everyone back now, so Neville can get a clear shot.
They all retreated, backing against the walls, leaving Neville alone beside the wardrobe. He looked pale and frightened, but he had pushed up the sleeves of his robes and was holding his wand ready.
On the count of 3, Neville,
said Professor Lupin, who was pointing his own wand at the handle of the wardrobe.
1, 2, 3, now!
A jet of sparks shot from the end of Professor Lupin's wand and hit the doorknob. The wardrobe burst open. Hook-nosed and menacing, Professor Snape stepped out, his eyes flashing at Neville. Neville backed away, his wand up, mouthing wordlessly. Snape was bearing down upon him, reaching inside his robes. "Ridiculous!" squeaked Neville. There was a noise like a whip crack. Snape stumbled. He was wearing a long, lace-trimmed dress and a towering hat topped with a moth-eaten vulture, and swinging a huge crimson handbag from his hand. There was a roar of laughter. Ah! Ah! Just one kid again. The boggart paused, confused, and Professor Lupin shouted,
Parvati, forward!
Parvati walked forward, her face set. Snape rounded on her. There was another crack, and where he stood was a blood-stained, bandaged mummy. Its sightless face was turned to Parvati, and it began to walk towards her, very slowly, dragging its feet, its stiff arms rising. "Ridiculous!" cried Parvati. A bandage unraveled at the mummy's feet. It became entangled, fell face forwards, and its head rolled off. "Seamus!" roared Professor Lupin. Seamus darted past Parvati. Crack! Where the mummy had been was a woman with floor-length black hair and a skeletal green-tinged face. A banshee. She opened her mouth wide, and an unearthly sound filled the room. Let's put on some other music for this, shall we? I don't know if it'll work. Yeah. She opened her mouth wide, and an unearthly sound filled the room, a long, wailing shriek, which made the hair on Harry's head stand on end.
Ridiculous! Shouted Seamus. The banshee made a rasping noise and clutched her throat. Her voice was gone. Crack! The banshee turned into a rat, which chased its tail in a circle. Then crack became a rattlesnake, which slithered and writhed before crack, becoming a single bloody eyeball. It's confused, shouted Lupin. We're getting there! Dean! Dean hurried forward. Crack, the eyeball became a severed hand, which flipped over and began to creep along the floor like a crab. Ridiculous! Yelled Dean. There was a snap, and the hand was trapped in a mousetrap. Excellent! Ron, you next! Ron leapt forward. Crack! Quite a few people screamed. A giant spider, 6 feet tall and covered in hair, was advancing on Ron, clicking its pincers menacingly. For a moment, Harry thought Ron had frozen. Then, ridiculous! Bellowed Ron, and the spider's legs vanished. It rolled over and over. Lavender Brown squealed and ran out of its way, and it came to a halt at Harry's feet. He raised his wand, ready, but here! Shouted Professor Lupin suddenly, hurrying forward. Crack! The legless spider had vanished. For a second, everyone looked wildly around to see where it was. Then they saw a silvery white orb hanging in the air in front of Lupin, who said, ridiculous, almost lazily. Crack! Forward, Neville, and finish him off, said Lupin, as the boggart landed on the floor as a cockroach. Crack! Snape was back. This time, Neville charged forward looking determined. Ridiculous! He shouted, and they had a split-second's view of Snape in his lacy dress before Neville let out a great ha of laughter, and the boggart exploded, burst into 1,000 tiny wisps of smoke, and was gone. Excellent! Cried Professor Lupin, as the class broke into applause. Excellent, Neville. Well done, everyone. Let me see. 5 points to Gryffindor for every person to tackle the boggart. 10 for Neville, because he did it twice, and 5 each to Hermione and Harry. Not bad. Okay, I got a couple of questions here. They didn't say exactly what would happen if this boggart actually attacked somebody. Would it have torn these children to pieces? What?
Highly likely.
Yeah. Again, this teacher's like, okay, here we go. These children, put them in danger. They have to learn. The child must learn. So I'm wondering about that. This boggart, I mean, don't they have spells that defend this school against all sorts of monsters? It's just constantly different monsters and things crawling around, and they're like, well, the children will have to deal with that. It's a great montage scene. Yeah, it is. It just feeds on fear. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Excellent. Okay, so Professor Lupin just ended that. But I didn't do anything, said Harry. You and Hermione answered my questions correctly at the start of the class, Harry, Lupin said lightly. Very well, everyone. An excellent lesson. Homework. Kindly read the chapter on boggarts and summarize it for me. To be handed in on Monday. That will be all. Talking excitedly, the class left the staff room. Harry, however, wasn't feeling cheerful. Professor Lupin had deliberately stopped him tackling the boggart. Why? Was it because he'd seen Harry collapse on the train and thought he wasn't up to much? Had he thought Harry would pass out again? But no one else seemed to have noticed anything. Did you see me take that banshee? Shouted Seamus. And the hand, said Dean. Oh, man. Sorry about that. That's a bit gross. It's a normal way. And the hand, said Dean, waving his own around. And Snape in that hat. And my mummy. I wonder why Professor Lupin's frightened of crystal balls, said Lavender thoughtfully. That was the best defense against the dark arts lesson we've ever had, wasn't it? Said Ron excitedly, as they made their way back to the classroom to get their bags. He seems a very good teacher, said Hermione approvingly, but I wish I could have a turn with the boggart. What would it have been for you? Said Ron, sniggering. A piece of homework that only got 9 out of 10. Good diss. That was a good diss. Chapter 8, Flight of the Fat Lady. Okay, one more question for you. What's a weird movie you like? An odd movie you like, and why do you like it? Not a popular one that everybody else likes, but usually like, you like that movie? Let me know. If only you could sneeze a boggart away. Yeah. Chapter 8, Flight of the Fat Lady. In no time at all, Defense Against the Dark Arts had become most people's favorite class. Only Draco Malfoy and his gang of Slytherins had anything bad to say of Professor Lupin. Of course. Look at the state of his robes, Malfoy would say in a loud whisper as Professor Lupin passed. He dresses like our old house elf. But no one else cared that Professor Lupin's robes were patched and frayed. His next few lessons were just as interesting as the first. After boggarts, they studied redcaps, nasty little goblin-like creatures that lurked wherever there had been bloodshed, in the dungeons of castles and the potholes of deserted battlefields, waiting to bludgeon those who had got lost. From redcaps, they moved on to kappas, creepy water dwellers that looked like scaly monkeys with webbed hands itching to strangle unwitting waders in their ponds. Harry only wished he was as happy with some of his other classes. Worst of all was potions. Snape was in a particularly vindictive mood these days, and no one was in any doubt why. The story of the boggart assuming Snape's shape and the way that Neville had dressed it in his grandmother's clothes had traveled through the school like wildfire. Snoop didn't seem to find it funny. His eyes flashed menacingly at the very mention of Professor Lupin's name, and he was bullying Neville worse than ever. Harry was also growing to dread the hours he spent in Professor Trelawney's stifling tower room, deciphering lopsided shapes and symbols, trying to ignore the way Professor Trelawney's enormous eyes filled with tears every time she looked at him. He couldn't like Professor Trelawney, even though she was treated with respect, bordering on reverence by many of the class. Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown had taken to... Okay, I need to find a difference for... Oh, what's that one girl's name who starts with S? Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown. There's 3 girls there, plus Ginny. I need to find 4 different voices. It's easier for me to do guys' voices because... But, yeah, I'm going to have to find some differences between them. Actually, if you want to, tell me the difference between those 3 girls. Ginny, I got my own thing on, but those 3 girls, tell me the difference between those for you. Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown had taken to haunting Professor Trelawney's tower room at lunchtimes, and always returned with annoyingly superior look on their faces, as though they knew things the others didn't. They had also started using hushed voices whenever they spoke to Harry, as though he was on his deathbed. Nobody really liked care of magical creatures, which, after the action-packed first class, had become extremely dull. Hagrid seemed to have lost his confidence. They were now spending lesson after lesson learning how to look after flobberworms, which had to be some of the most boring creatures in existence. Why would anyone bother looking after them? Said Ron, after yet another hour of poking shredded lettuce down the flobberworms' slimy throats. Oh, Hagrid, come on. He's got a tender heart. At the start of October, however, Harry had something else to occupy him. Something so enjoyable it made up for his unsatisfactory classes. The Quidditch season was approaching, and Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor team, called a meeting one Thursday evening to discuss tactics for the new season. There were 7 people on a Quidditch team. 3 chasers, whose job it was to score points by putting the quaffle, a red football-sized ball, through one of the 50-foot-high hoops at each end of the pitch. 2 beaters, who were equipped with heavy bats to repel the bludgers. 2 heavy black balls, which zoomed around trying to attack the players. A keeper, who defended the goalposts. And the seeker, who had the hardest job of all, that of catching the golden snitch. A tiny, winged, walnut-sized ball, whose capture ended the game and earned the seeker's team an extra 150 points.
Recap.
You got
it yet?
I think so. I think it got pounded into my brain. Oliver Wood was a burly 17-year-old, now in his 7th and final year at Hogwarts. What a stud. There was a quiet sort of desperation in his voice as he addressed his 6 fellow team members in the chilly changing rooms on the edge of the darkening Quidditch pitch. This is our last chance. My last chance to win the Quidditch Cup, he told them, striding up and down in front of them. I'll be leaving at the end of this year. Oh gosh. I'll never get another shot at it. Gryffindor... beautiful, lovely Scotland. Okay. Gryffindor haven't won for 7 years now. Okay, so we've had the worst luck in the world. Injuries, then the tournament getting called off last year. I'm slipping into Irish. Man, losing this. Wood swallowed, as though the memory still brought up a lump in his throat. But we also know we've got the best ruddy team in the whole school, he said, punching a fist into his other hand, the old manic glint back in his eye. We've got 3 superb chasers. Wood pointed at Alicia Spinnet, Angelina Johnson, and Katie Bell. We've got two unbeatable beaters. Stop it, Oliver. Stop it, Oliver. You're embarrassing us. Oh gosh, that accent throws me off so much. It's crazy. Oh yeah, Irish female characters. Yeah, I can do that. Stop it, Oliver. Oliver, you're embarrassing us, said Fred and George Weasley together, pretending to blush. And we've got a seeker who has never failed to win us a match, Wood rumbled, glaring at Harry with a kind of furious pride. And me, he added as an afterthought. We think you're very good too, Oliver, said George. Cracking keeper, said Fred. The point is, Wood went on, resuming his pacing, the Quidditch Cup should have had our name on it these last 2 years. Ah, that's so Irish. Man, I can't get it back. Ever since Harry joined the team, I've thought the thing was in the bag, but we haven't got it. And this year, the last chance we'll get to finally see our name on the thing. Oh, I'm going to work on that. I'm sorry. Wood spoke so dejectedly that even Fred and George looked sympathetic. Oliver, this year's our year, said Fred. We'll do it, Oliver, said Angelina. Definitely, said Harry. Whoa, that was hard. That was probably one of the hardest little stretches yet. I don't know why. Wow. They're all getting mixed together. Full of determination, the team started training sessions. 3 evenings a week. The weather was getting colder and wetter, the nights darker, but no amount of mud, wind, or rain could tarnish Harry's wonderful vision of finally winning the huge silver Quidditch Cup. Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room one evening, after training, cold and stiff, but pleased with the way practice had gone, to find the room buzzing excitedly. What's happened? What's happened? He asked Ron and Hermione, who were sitting in 2 of the best chairs by the fireside, and completing some star charts for astronomy. Look at him. Oh, just waiting for a good scratch. There you are. Outlander. Oh, is that Scottish? Okay, maybe I should. Thanks for the tip. First Hogsmeade weekend, said Ron, pointing at a notice that had appeared on the battered old notice board. End of October. Halloween. Excellent, said Fred, who had followed Harry through the portrait hole. I need to visit Zonko's. I'm nearly out of stink pellets. Harry threw himself into a chair beside Ron, his high spirits ebbing away. Hermione seemed to read his mind. Harry, I'm sure you'll be able to go next time, she said. They're bound to catch Black soon. He's been sighted once already. Black's not fool enough to try anything in Hogsmeade, said Ron. Ask McGonagall if you can go this time, Harry. The next one might not be for ages. Ron, said Hermione, Harry's supposed to stay in school. He can't be the only 3rd year left behind, said Ron. Ask McGonagall. Go on, Harry. Yeah, I think I will, said Harry, making up his mind. Hermione opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment Crookshanks leapt lightly onto her lap. A large dead spider was dangling from his mouth. Does he have to eat that in front of us? Said Ron, scowling. Clever Crookshanks. Did you catch that all by yourself? Said Hermione. Crookshanks slowly chewed up the spider, his yellow eyes fixed insolently on Ron. Screw you, Ron. Just keep him over there, that's all, said Ron irritably, turning back to his star chart. I've got Scabbers asleep in my bag. Harry yawned. He really wanted to go to bed, but he still had his own star chart to complete. He pulled his bag towards him, took out a parchment, ink and quill, and started work. You can copy mine, if you like, said Ron, labeling his last star with a flourish and shoving the chart towards Harry. Hermione, who disapproved of copying, pursed her lips, but didn't say anything. Crookshanks was still staring unblinkingly at Ron, flicking the end of his bushy tail. Then, without warning, he pounced. Ow! Ron roared, seizing his bag, as Crookshanks sank 4 sets of his claws deeply into it and began tearing ferociously. Get off, you stupid animal! Ron tried to pull the bag away from Crookshanks, but Crookshanks clung on, spitting and slashing. Ron, don't hurt him! Squealed Hermione. The whole common room was watching. Ron whirled the bag around, Crookshanks still clinging to it, and Scabbers came flying out of the top. Catch that cat! Ron yelled, as Crookshanks freed himself from the remnants of the bag, sprang over the table, and chased after the terrified Scabbers. George Weasley made a lunge for Crookshanks, but missed. Scabbers streaked through 20 pairs of legs and shot beneath an old chest of drawers. Crookshanks skidded to a halt, crouched low on his bandy legs, and started making furious swipes beneath the chest of drawers with his front paw. Ron and Hermione hurried over. Hermione grabbed Crookshanks around the middle and heaved him away. Ron threw himself into his stomach and with great difficulty pulled Scabbers out by the tail. Look at him, he said furiously to Hermione, dangling Scabbers in front of her. He's skin and bone. You keep that cat away from him. Crookshanks doesn't understand it's wrong, said Hermione, her voice shaking. All cats chase rats, Ron. There's something funny about that animal, said Ron, who was trying to persuade a frantically wiggling Scabbers back into his pocket. It heard me say that Scabbers was in my bag. Oh, what rubbish, said Hermione impatiently. Crookshanks could smell him, Ron. How else do you think that cat's got it in for Scabbers, said Ron, ignoring the people around him, who were starting to giggle. And Scabbers was here first, and he's ill. Ron marched through the common room and out of sight, up the stairs to the boys' dormitories. I'll end there. Okay, I'm going to tell you my theory. I do not want you to react to it, not like emojis or something like that. Just for fun, I'm going to tell you my theory just because I think you'll enjoy it. I think, again, don't tell me, don't react to it. I think that Scabbers is that large creature that Harry saw in that passageway or something like that. Oh, that doesn't make sense though, because he would have to be away from Ron, which Ron was somewhere else. That doesn't make much sense. But I think maybe Harry is that large dog-like creature that is trying to haunt him or kill him or something like that. Maybe he turns into it. Who knows? Yeah, that was pretty fun. Some fun stuff in there. I'm really enjoying this so much. I'm having so much fun. Thanks for participating. I love reading your comments. People wrote very nice things to me. This has just started out for me, just wanting to connect to people and read something that people enjoy, and I'm happy where it's gone. Do you have any questions for me? Let me know. Oh yeah, while you're writing the questions, follow Jalen Sape, a friend of mine, for fun musical interludes she creates. Follow my company and Kenton's company. He's also in the chat. Cave Canon Productions. Follow my brother Mike Voth 1984 for some arts. Mark over here at yoc.creations. I don't have a cupcake anymore, unfortunately. I don't have a cupcake. I'm doing something now. It's the time to try it out. I'm doing keto. I'm trying keto out, where you don't eat any. Well, you can have 20 grams of carbs or 50 grams of carbs a day and no sugar. Oh man, I'm on the 3rd day and I'm feeling surprisingly good, but it's tough not eating chocolate and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. You have a great night too. Yeah. Okay. Yikes. I know. Hey, Rebecca, say hi to both of your daughters for me. Carrie, you do keto? Okay, maybe we can talk. I need some hot tips about that. I'm not punishing myself. I'm just trying something new. I try something new every year. I look better already. Very funny, kitten. All right, thanks, Josh. Say hi to Shay for me. You all have a great evening. I will see you tomorrow again at 6 p.m. Much love. Bye.